ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Dinozor Gaming, where we learn to be a better player. So today we're going to be talking about Legends of the Force, the set that everyone has been waiting for. It's the 5th set in Star Wars Unlimited, and we just got the reveals for what the new 2 starter spotlight leaders are going to be, as well as a handful of cards and the new mechanics, and it's looking to be an amazing set. But what makes this set even more interesting is that it's coming out in early July, which is just before the Galactic Championships, where the world champion for Star Wars Unlimited Season 0 of the first year is going to be determined. So this set, people are only going to have a couple of weeks to play with the cards, to test it out before they will be fighting for that title. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. And the first thing we're going to be taking a look at is the new mechanic, the Force. So the Force, as we see on the bottom here, is a token. And how do you generate that token? With many ways, and one of the most common ways to do it is with the new common bases. So unlike other sets, instead of having the typical 30 health base with no effect, in this set, every common base, every color will have the same base that says when a friendly Force unit attacks, the Force is with you. That basically means that when you are attacking with a Force unit, you generate this Force token. We will get to what it will do in a second. So Force units themselves will be very important this set. And of course, they also announced that we will be having additional rare bases possibly in the packs. They didn't mention what they do, but they did mention that they will also be generating the Force, but in a more unique way to your own color. We can only speculate, but probably something along the lines of Vigilance, maybe defeating a unit, Cunning, maybe bouncing a unit, who knows. But essentially, you will be generating the Force token when you use these bases, as well as a few other cards that we will talk about later. What the Force token is it is a token that you either have or you don't, which means unlike other tokens, you cannot have more than one. If you already have the Force and attempt to generate another one by attacking with another Force unit, you will not create a second one. So you can only have one, so make sure you use it before you try to make a new one. Now, what is this used for? Let's go ahead and take a look at the first spotlight leader, Darth Maul. So Darth Maul is a very aggressive, well, of course, he's an aggression villainy leader, who on the leader side says action, tap, and use the Force token. So the Force token that we just generated, you need to consume it to deal 1 damage to a unit and 1 damage to a different unit. That is doing 2 damage for no resources. We've already seen how strong pings are in Quinlan, Cad Bane, Jango Fett. So we know that pings are a very big factor in this game. So being able to do 2 damage through pings for basically no resources, of course the only resource being the Force token that you're using, is very, very strong. And on the unit side, when you flip him as a 6 cost, he's a 5/6. It is not the highest power that we have seen, highest toughness that we have seen for a leader, which is not necessarily great, but it is pretty aggressively statted, and that's what this deck wants. It wants aggression. And on attack, it still does the same effect of dealing a damage to a unit and to a different unit. However, this time you do not need the Force token. So of course, in this, a key thing to notice in this is that the trigger to doing the second damage is mandatory, and it does not specify enemy unit. So if you're dealing a damage to an enemy unit and he doesn't have a second one, well, that second damage needs to go on one of your own units. That could even be Darth Maul himself. So be careful when you're using it, but if you're using it correctly, being able to dish out 2 damage, ideally every single turn across your opponent's board, is a very, very powerful effect. So now let's take a look at some of the cards that were revealed that will be coming out in the Spotlight deck for Darth Maul. And here we are. So the first one we're going to be taking a look at is Darth Sidious. Is an 8 cost 6/8, very high stat line that has Restore 2, and that says when played, you may use the Force. If you do, defeat each non-Sith unit with 3 or less remaining HP. That is a very strong effect. Has quite a bit of similarities with Supreme Leader Snoke, in that Snoke was very good at getting rid of low health units, giving everything -2/-2. This is pretty similar, except that it does it for 3 or less health, and it only hits non-Sith units, which could be a good thing or a bad thing, of course. Non-Sith probably targets mostly your opponent's units, as your deck will usually have a lot of Sith. However, if you are also playing versus a Sith deck, this effect might not do much for you. That said, a 6/8 body with a Restore 2 is pretty hefty. Very hard to get rid of unless you have very specific removal for those big creatures. So I think overall this is a very strong card. On top of that, it is a Force unit that can generate the Force for you. It is also a Separatist, which means you can cheat it out with things like the Count Dooku leader a bit earlier. And on top of that, being 8 cost, while it is expensive, it is very conveniently statted, especially if you're playing this with command villainy, as a lot of the 7 cost Force units have ambush, making it so you can guarantee having the Force token on the turn that you're going to play him. So for example, if you're playing a Darth Vader on turn 6 when you have 7 resources, or a Maul, both of them have ambush. So not only are you dealing with your opponent's board, but you're setting up your Darth Sidious next turn. So enough about that card. We're going to take a look at the next one. Drain Essence, 2 cost event that says deal 2 damage to a unit. The Force is with you. So this is one of the only new ways that they've showed us of generating the Force outside of the bases. Dealing 2 damage for 2, while is a bit under statted in a way. Basically, we have Daring Raid that does that for 1. This time it's also generating the Force token for you, which could ideally bump this up to a next level, being able to trigger your other effects. Overall, very interesting card. Activates the key mechanic of the set. Something to keep an eye on. Next up, we're going to be taking a look at Darth Maul's lightsaber. So unlike most other lightsabers, it is not a 3 cost 3/3. This is a 3 cost +4 +2. And on top of that, it says, when played, if attached unit is Darth Maul, you may immediately attack with him. For this attack, he gains Overwhelm and can't attack bases. So a lot of the problems that lightsabers had in the past is that as soon as you equip it, there's a very good chance that your opponent uses something like Fell the Dragon or Takedown to prevent that attack. So the good thing about this lightsaber is that as soon as you use it, you immediately get to attack with it, making it so it's less likely for your opponent to get value from getting rid of your unit. And so when this is attached on the Maul leader that we just saw, that's dealing 9 attack with an Overwhelm. On top of that, of course, you have the on attack trigger, so you get to basically be doing a 10 attack if you want to count it that way. This is doing a massive amount of base damage even though you're not directly attacking the base. But on top of that, you have to keep in mind that we also have the other Darth Maul unit that we received in a previous set, which is the 5/6 that lets you attack 2 units at the same time. If you attach this lightsaber to that Maul, that's dealing 9 damage to 2 separate units, and both of them are overwhelming on the opponent's base. That is an incredible amount of damage, very likely to do upwards of 14, 15 damage to your opponent's base, and that is a game-ending play. Next up, we're going to be looking at the Scimitar. That is a Sith vehicle transport for 4 cost that has 3/4 in stats, and that says while this unit is damaged, it gets +3/+0. Very straightforward effect, but not to be underestimated. So as we mentioned earlier, Darth Maul, if your opponent does not have a second unit, or even if they do and you don't want to, you can definitely trigger that second damage on Scimitar, making this a 6/3. That is a pretty good stat line for 4. Of course, so you won't feel bad if this is damaged. You can also use this to trade into something, and then it becomes a threat that your opponent needs to deal with. But a very interesting thing to know about this Scimitar is that it also works extremely well with the set 1 leader, Grand Inquisitor. Being able to play this on turn 3 and immediately using Grand Inquisitor to ready this lets you do 6 damage to your opponent's base. Very aggressive, and if they don't get rid of it right away, you're doing another 6 damage right away. Moving on to the last card that we saw for Darth Maul's Spotlight deck is Savage Oppress. So this is a 6 cost 9/6 Overwhelm that says when played and when defeated, you may use the Force, and if you don't, deal 9 damage to your base. That is a big downside, but will it matter? Well, that depends. If you are playing an aggressive deck and if you are the one that's dishing out most of the damage to your opponent's base and they are always on the back foot trying to get rid of whatever threats you're putting down, your base's damage does not matter. Of course, if you get this triggered twice in a row, dealing 80 damage to your base, that's quite a bit. But if you have the Force token for at least one of those, dealing 9 damage to your base is not a big downside, especially if you get to attack with this at least once. And the very key thing to note here is that this is a 6 cost card, which means you get to use it with Energy Conversion Lab. Now, we have seen what Energy Conversion Lab can do when it's played with, for example, Record. That is a 7/6 with Overwhelm that can deal 5 damage when it enters. This is a 9/6, so if your opponent has something that's left over with 1 or 2 health and you Energy Conversion Lab this, it's dealing 6, 7, maybe even 8 damage to their base out of hand with no warning. That is a lot of reach that can completely close out a game. All right. Enough about the villainy side. Let's go ahead and switch over to the heroism, and we finally get a Qui-Gon Jinn. Everybody has been waiting for this leader. He has been mysteriously absent from the game for all this time, and we finally have him. And now Qui-Gon Jinn has a very interesting effect that says action, tap, use the Force token, return a friendly non-leader unit to its owner's hand, play a non-villainy unit that costs less than the returned unit from your hand for free. Now this is good. It's meant to essentially, if you've used the unit and it's taken some damage maybe, or you've already used its when played effect and you don't need it anymore, you get to immediately bounce that back to your hand, play something else in the same action. Yes, that new card has to cost less, but that is still a pretty good way to reuse your when playeds, or maybe save something that was about to die. Just an overall very strong effect, and we'll talk in a second about why and what makes that so special. So on the leader side, it is a 6-cost 4/7, very average stat line, nothing to complain about. It says when this unit completes an attack and survives, you get the same effect, but without using the Force token. Now what makes this so special is that there are a lot of units on the heroism side that have good when played effects. If we look at simply in cunning heroism, for example, we have things like Ahsoka Tano that makes your opponent discard a card. We have Kira that looks at your opponent's hand and says, no, you can't play that this turn. We have things like R2-D2 that can filter your hand. And if we look outside of cunning, we have some very interesting things like, for example, Luke Skywalker. You can play a Luke Skywalker for 7, use its ability to deal -6/-6 to something, and then bounce it right back to your hand, play something that costs a bit less, maybe an Obi-Wan that's a Sentinel, and then the next turn you get to repeat that Luke again. Good, very strong. And on top of that, those are only the fair applications of this guy's effect. There are even more unfair ways to use this. For example, if you're using Commandeer or Change of Heart, you get to steal your opponent's unit, and normally they would get it back at the end of the turn, either in their hand or on their play. Well, if you steal a unit and then use Qui-Gon Jinn, you bounce that unit back to their hand and you get to play something for free. That is an incredibly big swing that can essentially end the game on the spot. This is an effect that on paper might not look overwhelming, but this can create some scenarios where you've locked someone out of the game if you're just using the same on when played ability over and over, especially if you're, for example, you're using something that has ambush. Ambush is coming in, killing something, and because if you're using a Force unit that's ambush, you're generating the token again, so you can just use this again. Extremely powerful card. So let's go ahead and check out some of the cards that come in his Spotlight deck. And the first one is Obi-Wan Kenobi. Finally, we're getting a second iteration of this unit, and this time he is in Command Heroism as a 3/5 for 3 that says when you play a Force unit, including this, you gain Sentinel for the phase. That is extremely strong. So we haven't had any 3/5 Sentinels outside of maybe Emperor's Royal Guards, and even that was conditional. This is more or less conditionless on the turn you play him, and then in a world where you're playing a deck full of Force units, you'll be getting Sentinel almost every phase, and just a 3-cost 3/5 is an incredible stat line to stop all aggression from your opponent's side. Just an overall fantastic card. Works well with Qui-Gon as well, of course, whether you're bouncing him to play another unit when he's already absorbed some damage, or if you're bouncing another unit to play a Force unit to turn this into a Sentinel. Just overall very good card. Next up, we have Refugee of the Path that says you 1-cost 0/3 Force Fringe that says when played you may give a shield token to a unit with a Sentinel. It looks like this deck is focusing a bit on Sentinels if you're looking at Obi-Wan, and being able to give a shield token to something that your opponent absolutely has to attack is just a very good card. We don't have a lot of shielded Sentinels in the game, but the few that we have seen some uses. Especially we have seen Village Protector be quite the speed bump for decks like Sabine. So being able to just give a shield to a Sentinel unit is a very strong effect. Of course, next up we have Anakin Skywalker, and we're finally going to be seeing the second mechanic of this set that they have said is not going to be limited to just this set. We're going to be seeing Hidden quite a bit going forward. And Hidden says that this unit cannot be attacked if it was played this phase. Of course, it was specified that if you gain Sentinel in some way, Hidden no longer applies. So this only works if you don't have Sentinel. But that is a very good way to make sure that your units don't die right away when you play them, especially if they are force units that you need to attack with in order to generate the force token. This is just a 1-cost 1/1 that is force. He's hidden, he is shielded, pretty hard to get rid of. And of course, not very threatening, but having a unit that can generate you the force token every single turn, unless your opponent puts quite a few resources into it, is pretty good. Finally, on 5, we have Qui-Gon Jinn's Aether Sprite that says is a 5-cost 3/6 Jedi Republic vehicle fighter. It says on attack, the next time you use a when played ability this phase, you may use that ability again. So as we mentioned earlier, when you're using Qui-Gon's effect to bounce something in your hand and play something a bit cheaper, you can abuse when played abilities. Well, Qui-Gon's Aether Sprite lets you do that a second time. So if you get to attack with the Aether Sprite and then bounce it with Qui-Gon Jinn's effect, then play the Ahsoka Tano that we mentioned earlier, your opponent is now discarding 2 cards and you basically use no resources. Incredibly powerful play. Might be a bit too slow because on attack triggers on a ship that's not very well statted. Remains to be seen if it'll see play. It's very similar and comparable to the Shadowcaster that we saw that was meant to be used with Thrawn in set 4. It's a bit too slow, needing that have that in play and then triggering your other abilities. That said, it is a strong effect. And finally, the last one we're going to be looking at is Stinger Mantis. That says it's a 5-cost 4/6 fringe vehicle transport that says when played you may deal 2 damage to an exhausted unit. Well, that's pretty good. It's essentially a slightly cheaper Ruthless Raider that doesn't deal the damage to the base. Of course, there's a slight condition on dealing the damage to the unit, but it is a very minor condition, especially in Cunning, that can either easily exhaust things or just wait for your opponent to have attack with them, or if you just played something this turn. Just overall a very good card, lets you win back the board. Okay, and that's it for the Spotlight decks. Of course, we got another reveal in the Porg there in the corner. A 0-cost 1/1. Not much to say about that. Very cute card. That said, I mean, in general, anytime a card game that has a card that can be played for 0 resources, it's pretty good. I'm sure someone will find a way to break this. A cute thing about it is that Quinlan can now use this to ping tokens that we previously couldn't. And of course, in the bottom right here, we have some of the art for the packs, whether that's the Carbonite editions, the pre-release boxes, the regular packs. Now, all that said, I would love to hear what you guys think about this new set. Do you like the new mechanics? Do you like Hidden? Do you like the Force? Is this the set that you have been waiting for? What else are you waiting for from this set? So, with all that said, thank you very much, everybody, for listening, and see you next time.